Welcome back to Disturbing the Priest. I'm your host, Brandon Battick, and I'm joined by a very, very special guest here. One of my favorite joke writers in all of New England, the Milford murderer, the comedy cop, the overweight champ himself, Tim Champa. What's going on?
Not much, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course.
How close do I have to get to this thing?
Yeah. This is a good distance right here. I got the
I'm used to eating the mic on
volumes.
stage. Yeah.
Well, thankfully, I hope you don't have an appetite because you can have some space this time.
Beautiful.
I think,
Thanks for the kind words, man. Milford murderer. That's not a great moniker. That seems like something you'd see in a newspaper, right?
I feel like I might look like the Milford murderer.
Yeah, you definitely look like the Milford murderer.
Well, I think the last time I saw you was at the rooftop show.
Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were telling me about you were into like a lot of Christian metal bands.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think more like post-hardcore Christian bands,
Oh,
like
really?
in my high school, college days. But I definitely had a level of exposure to a lot of Christian nu metal bands and stuff like that in the late 90s, early 2000s as well. Like it was just a bit. I was very involved in church and grew up really religious, and it was a huge part of the culture, especially like the alternative culture at church, to the extent that existed.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't even like the bad kids. It was just like the hip kids at church would be into. Eventually, it was like Christian punk rock and Christian ska and stuff.
It's so funny. Christian ska.
Yeah, man. Five Iron Frenzy, the OC Supertones. It was like a whole thing.
Wow. Was that like your first like exposure to metal?
Nu metal probably was.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had some like mild exposure to Metallica, like very like radio hits sort of exposure, but Limp Bizkit and Linkin Park were probably like the first things I listened to that were even like metal adjacent. Probably.
Yeah, and this was when you were like a missionary, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So was there like a big issue with like your parents with that stuff? Because I know there was there was a huge thing with that in like the 80s.
Well, it was first of all, like nu metal was huge in Europe, and I think still is.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, and so it was. Limp Bizkit and Linkin Park were all over MTV and like MTV Europe and all that stuff. So like I'd just be at home like watching it, and it would be like the censored version on TV anyway. I don't think my parents like cared that much. I don't think they were paying that close attention, But that's the whole reason why you have so many Christian nu metal bands, is so that kids could listen to that music at the time without their parents getting mad about the lyrics.
Yeah, and I can't even imagine what some of the lyrics are on that.
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned to you last time there's a band Thousand Foot Crutch who did a cover of that song "You're Unbelievable,"
Yeah.
but it's like about Jesus being unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so it's like a lot of that sort of stuff. And honestly, like some of the other big ones were like Pillar and Skillet, and I never really listened to them.
Skillet is the one I know. Yeah.
I couldn't even tell you what their lyrics are. Oh, the other, this is probably the biggest one, was POD. And their lyrics were very almost like Rastafarian, I would say. So it's like they were religious in that sort of same like vocabulary of like Zion, and I actually don't remember where the lead singer is from, but either it was deeply problematically, what's the word I'm looking for? Culture theft, or he actually had some like legitimate claim to that style, but yeah, it was very. They were unique in that sense. Like most Christian bands talk colloquially like we do, but his lyrics were very felt very like reggae and Rastafarian to me.
Those are probably some like weird shows. Like did you ever see any of those live?
Only at there was a Christian music festival up in New Hampshire. I don't know if they still have it. It's called the Inside Out Soul Festival.
Okay.
But it was like it was mostly a rock festival, but it was across all genres. So they would have the Christian punk and ska bands I was talking about, and then also bands like this. And I think that was the only time I ever saw POD live. And so it's tough to gauge because it's just like a main stage or a side stage where like totally different bands are cycling through. So you don't get as much of a sense of what their true live experience is like if you saw them at a club or something.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that's like. Like instead of like wall of death, it's like a wall of life or something.
Yeah.
There's probably some parallels.
Circle pit, like the circle of Christ's love. Yeah.
Or like going around his halo.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But everything had a level of, it was like a lot of rap rock, and then there was some screaming, but it was a lot of like almost like butt rock singing vocals.
Like screaming. Okay, so yeah, because I was gonna ask if it was like more screamo kind of screaming.
Yeah, it was like
Okay.
to the extent that there was screaming, it would be like usually like the higher pitched screamo screaming, which to this day I still prefer. Honestly, I don't know what it is about it, but it's more sonically pleasing to me than like
Interesting.
like I think my favorite screaming is from the band Under Oath, which is a Christian post-hardcore band.
I've heard of them, yeah.
And they're funny because they started out as very post-hardcore screamo, and then they went in a much heavier metal direction, with a heavier emphasis on their screaming vocalist. But yeah, I don't know why. I just always preferred the high pitch.
What do you even listen to? Like what bands?
Now,
Yeah.
I listen to I'm big into pop music. I'm into like all sorts of stuff. I listen to a lot of pop punk. Lately a ton of 4 Year Strong. I love Turnstile. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I don't think I am.
They're like a newer hardcore band, but they're like they opened for Blink-182 on tour. They're like
Oh, really?
almost that like easy listening hardcore. So into that, but I'm also huge into R&B. Like I love Miguel and Frank Ocean and guys like that. So I'm kind of all over the map. I think like my background when I'm a musician too. So when I started getting into music, it was very new metal focused, and then it was punk for a long time. It was like Green Day, and then a lot of Christian bands too. But even I don't know if you've heard of MXPX.
No.
But they were pretty like well known even outside of like the Christian punk rock scene. So like that was big for me for a long time. And then I get into metalcore and post hardcore after that, in terms of what I played. But then also I met some kid that I worked with, and we started like a pop band together where I would just
Really?
like write songs for him because he had an incredible, almost like boy band style voice. So I would just write songs for him and play like blues and that style guitar playing too. So, and I had gotten into Stevie Ray Vaughan and, so just really all over the map in terms of what
So you have like a
what I enjoy.
massive palette for music, it seems.
Yeah, and I don't really have a guilty pleasure like mindset about most of it. I'll still occasionally listen to a Limp Bizkit song, and I'll listen to it and be like, "This is bad, but it's fun."
Yeah.
And I'm that way with like a lot of stuff, like Carly Rae Jepsen or whatever. But I'm not like undeniably that's a catchy hook, and I'm impressed that somebody could write that. Like one of the musicians who impresses me the most is Max Martin. Are you familiar with
No.
him? He's like one of the most prolific pop songwriters of all time. He actually started out in playing in Swedish metal bands.
Oh, did he?
I think, yeah. And he was like in the studio, and somebody like realized that he had a knack for producing and for writing melodies and stuff. So they like hired him, and like while he was in this heavy metal band on the side, he was like writing and producing like the poppiest pop hits that you could have. But like this dude has written some of the most successful pop hits of all time
Really?
across like he wrote like tons of stuff for the Backstreet Boys and for Britney Spears, but also wrote for Katy Perry, and it'll be like the song, like the number one singles for like all of these people, and they are undeniably earworm pop songs. Like even if you don't like that style of music, you can like analyze it next to other pop songs and be like, his knack for melody is kind of insane.
That is wild. Well, like I feel like there are definitely a lot of intersecting elements of like genres. Like there's a lot of metal borrows from like classical music,
Totally, yeah.
and like even hooks. You can find in pop and metal. Like that's the whole thing with like death metal bands like covering pop songs. It's like this weirdly kind of works.
Totally. Well, and I think especially for metal, depending on the subgenre, there is so much harmony that's happening across like the layered guitar work and all that stuff, and to be able to have that sort of like symphony of all those tones and melodies and counter melodies happening at the same time, it definitely helps you out if you're like writing a stripped down pop song and just want to have like a slightly more interesting take on a hook than somebody else would do.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say about Max Martin the most, is like he'll write a pop song where he'll take the melody in a direction that it like shocks me, where I'm like, if I was writing this song, I never would have done that in a million years, and it annoys me how good of a choice it is. Just a very counterintuitive sort of stuff.
How long have you been playing guitar?
About 20 years.
Cool. Well, I think you're just like extremely creative, because like not just like the joke writing, but like you have like an animated sci-fi show that I feel like is kind of like not a lot of people know about, a little under the radar.
That's for sure. Yeah, that's the kindest way you could have said that. Yeah.
And it's like, and it's what's so cool is like you're making the music for all of it, even like Battle Snakes or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I dabble in animation. Like it's shitty, but it's like it's very DIY, and it's to get like a joke or a little sketch across, it's usually fine. It was too ambitious with my abilities to try to make a full animated sci-fi cartoon, but it did. I tried, and the music was the funnest part for me. I loved like I had like theme songs for most of the characters that I would weave in, and even like I'd have an episode where I introduce a new character, and I'm like, what's this character's theme gonna be? And that was like honestly probably the most fun I've had playing guitar in a long time, was writing for that show.
Yeah, well, like I feel like comedy goes hand in hand with like literally everything, So like with animation, storytelling, music, especially. I know, of course, like bands like Tenacious D, one of my favorites, and there's so many amazing kind of like joke bands out there. Not saying a band like Municipal Waste is,
Sure,
but there's so much humor integrated in it.
I love a band that just doesn't take themselves seriously, even if like their music is serious. Like it's one of the things that I do enjoy about Blink-182 is the fact that they're just like whatever, they're just dudes like fucking around more or less. And Guar, obviously, I mean Guar is a full-on joke band, but like the charm of people who are not like overly serious is always something that appeals to me.
Yeah, of course, and just the commitment to the bit.
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
You know
totally.
what I mean? Now I really like something you've done like so much, and something you're doing now is you're doing like these like you're talking about like joke structure online. You're talking about the art of rewriting material and stuff. So what inspired you to like start making content about like joke writing itself?
I think that joke writing is my favorite part of stand-up, hands down. And I think like my ideal career. I mean, I think we'd all love to have like the Netflix special and be a famous touring comedian, of course. But I think a more realistic comedy career for me would be writing for TV or something like that, and that would be really fulfilling. for me. So anyway, that's the thing that I'm passionate about in stand up, and it's been something that even outside of stand up have been good at for most of my life. Like even in like a corporate context, written communication was something I was strong at, and it helped me like advance and climb the corporate ladder and all that sort of stuff. So, and I even mentioned in one of the videos I posted how my dad used to just always drill into me, there's no such thing as good writing, only good rewriting. And so that has always just been a part of. I also have OCD, so that helps. Because
Yeah,
like I'll write an email and I'll read it 3 times and I'll send it and I'll read it again. Like that's so. But I do that with my jokes too. To the which drives my wife insane because I'm like, what do you think? Should I say or the here? And she's like, I literally could not give a fuck.
So it's a blessing and a curse, kind of.
Yeah, well, I didn't know I had OCD until a couple years ago because I got hospitalized for it. Basically, it's a
Really?
long story, but basically, I've always had OCD and like a level of perfectionism that stems from that. But it also, like under certain extreme circumstances, I can have episodes that are just like totally debilitating. And so I'm on medication now because it was like the first time in my life that I realized that one of these episodes I had a diagnosis. I never even thought in a million years to connect it to OCD, but like multiple doctors were like, "Oh yeah, this is just a weird type of OCD that's actually not that uncommon." And anyway, so I'm on medication now, which helps like with those aspects, but I can still like lean into the perfectionism when I have to. So I can do it for like writing jokes or music if I didn't like that guitar lick quite as much as I wanted to, and that that sort of thing. So
Yeah, yeah, it can definitely be like a double-edged sword too, because some comics might be like, "Fuck the medication. This makes me a better comic." Do you think like that's harmful? Like, there's nothing to gain out of that? Because there's comics that will keep their lives shitty just to be able to develop new material,
yeah,
or is it more like about joke structure in the art of the craft?
I think it's an adjustment if you're happy. Like I think if your mental illness stuff has been your context your whole life and you've figured out how to write jokes within that context and you're suddenly happy, that can be an adjustment, and that probably freaks people out when they first are like, "Oh shit, I feel happy and I'm not able to write," and then they conflate those two things. I just think like anything in life, it's a transition, and you'll eventually figure it out. I don't have. I think it's probably more true of music than it is of comedy, honestly, because you can see distinct changes in people
For sure.
in the quality of the music that they put out after they get clean or they, whatever. And I'm
Making
not,
millions of dollars, in a mansion.
yeah. Whereas like Gary Goldman started getting like serious treatment for his stand up or for his depression. And his stand up is just as sharp as ever. So I think it's gotten a lot. I think we've gotten way better at dosing because in the like 80s, 90s when Prozac and stuff was first coming out, I think people would way over prescribe it. And I don't just mean like to too many people, but like too high a dosage to the people they were prescribing it to. And that's where you get this cliche of, oh, I don't feel like myself. Like I feel too, the drugs have like neutered my brain to the point where I'm just flat all the time. Most psychiatrists will tell you now that that's not how you should feel on antidepressants or those types of drugs. They want you to feel like yourself, but the worst parts of your mental illness are held at bay. And that's truly how I feel with my dosage.
Yeah, I honestly completely agree with what you're saying. Like, as a kid, I was actually like, I was taking like Adderall in like the third grade and
Jesus.
stuff. At one point, I remember I had like a patch too.
Fuck. On your
I
eye?
turned
That
out
sounds
great.
sick. Yeah.
So I'm just completely clean off that stuff.
Oh, wow.
Because it's like even just Adderall or like anything that's like prescribed, I just kind of have some like bad memories with.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
I get that. Yeah.
But it's definitely like something that like I feel like I was talking about how, and you were talking about how pain could help with like joke writing, but I think also like healing can help as well. We're like getting over trauma and like talking about it and like kind of structuring it into a joke. I know has helped like a lot of comics.
Yeah.
But I think an issue is some comics will like kind of just take it as their therapy and not put it into joke structure.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
just, air their dirty laundry.
You know John Flagg, right?
Yeah.
Worcester comedian. He's always saying, he's like, too many people think, because Bill Burr's so good at what he does, too many people think you could just walk off the street onto a stage and do stand up by like ranting and giving your hot takes or whatever, and that's going to be stand up.
Yeah, I thought you were about to say something way different about John Flagg, but Bill Burr, he started as a one-liner comic, the first year of his of doing stand-up, because it's like I need to figure out the setup
mechanics.
and punchline,
Yeah.
and then once you know how to do that, you can take a bit or like a story and be like, oh, I can go boom, 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 there.
Figure out where
you know?
where that dynamic can fit into the story.
Yeah, instead of learning how to tell a story and tell a joke at the same time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which I feel like a lot of comics try to do, and it's just hard trying to learn everything at once.
Totally.
That's something I kind of wish I did more of, like one-liners. For a while, I was doing this for like 7 months. I wish I went back at it. I was doing 5 one-liners a day, just to get the gears moving. But it just got to the point when like I'm at a party in the bathroom. Like, what's weird about tadpoles is, and it's like, maybe this is a little excessive.
Yeah, it sounds like you might have OCD, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Diagnosed. Do you think it's like, is there's that massive debate of like, can you teach comedy or do you have it? I personally think it's like a 50-50 like nature nurture thing, where you can 50% learn it, but you also kind of have to just like be a comic. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, one of the things I think about all the time is that I think I'm one of the least funny people that I know. And I mean that sincerely. Like, I think my wife is funnier than me. I think like most of the people in my group of friends are funnier than me, but they could never do stand up. I just think stand up is its own thing, at least the way I do it and approach it, which if you watch my videos, you're probably like, man, this guy is probably fun at parties, because it's very like cerebral. And some people might think I'm taking the fun out of stand up, but for me, like, that problem solving dynamic is what I love about it. But so all of that to say, like, I think you need certain skills that don't necessarily have to go hand in hand with being a funny person. And if you have those skills and you can apply them to writing jokes and joke telling, then you can maybe be at least somewhat successful at stand up. And then any amount of like natural comedic ability that you have on top of that, or just being naturally funny, is going to enhance that. But at the same time, if you come into stand up and all you've ever been is back of the bus funny, like you're the guy in your friend group who can make everybody laugh, but you have no idea how to put that in a context that makes sense for an audience, you're not going to be good at stand up. And so I think both people coming at it from both of those angles, like good at it from a cerebral standpoint, good at it from like a instinctual standpoint, have to get better at the thing that those other people are naturally good at. And I think doing stand up has made me more naturally funny. And not that I was ever like, I was one of the guys like cracking jokes and friends being like, oh, you should do stand up. But like, I just think my friends are funnier than me, but I think working in stand up and thinking in these like joke structures are almost like algorithms, and like constantly thinking about that, like, just makes me, and the other thing I think is avoiding hack, like learning to filter out the thought of like the easiest dick joke for whatever situation is happening in your life, and then pivot to what's something a little more creatively funny I could say in this moment. Like, those sorts of instincts that you build up over the course of doing stand up will make you funnier outside of like your actual joke crafting also, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I feel like doing stand up has made me like has made me unfunnier, if anything. I don't know, man. I remember the first time I met you, I'm like, yep, he's definitely a writer. Because I'm kind of like the same way, where it's like when people tell me they write on stage and they kind of just have a loose thought and they go up, and I'm like, I don't know how the fuck you do that. For me, I have to sit down, I have to look at like 8 different angles, I have to play with each one, I have to rewrite a bit like 10 times before I even do it on stage. It's something I'm really impressed at, but I just can't fathom it, and I'm also like kind of jealous that people can do
Totally, yeah, I am too. There are people that the way I think that it works, and this is like kind of a long journey, so go with me.
Yeah.
I was reading about some article years ago about horse betting and how there are these guys that have no formal training, no statistical understanding, but who could consistently pick horses well. And they would like interview them and be like, what are you using to do this? And they would have like oh, well, I check and see if the horses are sick or whatever. But they are operating at a level beyond their own understanding. They have algorithms that are running in their brain that are making judgments about these horses it's almost like AI, where it's like behind a curtain that they couldn't tell you exactly what's happening in their brain. And so a lot of it is on an intuitive gut level. And I think that for a lot of people who are brilliant at stand-up, that's happening for them too. Like they don't think about it at the level of granularity that I do, because they don't need to. And it's like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting being like, do you have any idea how fucking easy this is for me? Like I think there are people who are like that. Bill Burr, I think, is one of them. Not that he doesn't have a mastery of like individual joke elements, but like I've told this story multiple times on podcasts, I'm sure, but I saw him working out a new bit at Capo in Boston, and he started to tell the story, and then he stopped himself and he said into the mic, he goes, I have to figure out how to make this funny. And then he just told it and it crushed. Wow. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, what does he mean by that? And like, is it tone? Is it like he's pre-structuring it as he goes? Is it like I have to turn on the algorithm in my brain that makes something funny as I say? Like, I don't know what that means, and it's not a way that I think about comedy, and it terrified me because I'm like, I don't think I have whatever that is. You know?
Yeah, I can't just calculate. I think it's definitely like a subconscious thing, and it's like a muscle that just develops with just constant reps. I always thought comedy was like a very much like a rep based thing, where it's like, I think the best advice you can ever give any comic starting out is just stage time.
Yeah.
Just get comfortable on stage.
Well, it's one of the things that stands out to me about, like, anytime I work with a headliner who's been doing it like 10 years plus, they may not be to my taste, and I may not get why they're getting laughs, but they're murderers. And it's intimidating. It's like, what is happening where you just get to a place where you go up there and you're just destroying on what to me is not a discernible joke. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, man.
I can relate. But I think that gets to your point of like, if you do this long enough, you get good at it. If you have a base level of talent and you do it if you do anything for 10 years consistently, you're probably going to get pretty good at it. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's the wrong way to put it. Maybe not good, because there's plenty of hacks that have been doing this 10 years plus. Yeah. I just mean consistent in terms of audience response and bookability, because you're a killer. And hacks can be killers as much as anyone else.
Yeah, and being proactive with your development as well, instead of every show being like, I crushed, this wasn't my audience.
Yeah.
And just kind of like being in your own head of like, oh, I already am there, I'm just going to do my thing. I think that's the issue with a lot of comics who are kind of stuck at that 10-year, and they're still kind of at the same place they've started when they were like 3 months in.
Is the lack of confidence, you think?
I think it's overconfidence.
Yeah.
I think it's comics who really, because I'm really hard on myself,
Yeah.
which doesn't help me at all. It does not help with mental health. It also, doesn't help with like, because sometimes it is good to like have a good set and look at that and be like, okay, that was
Yeah.
a set, instead of, all right, that sucked, that sucked, that sucked. Where it's good to have, but I feel like at the same time, it's definitely like really unhealthy.
Yeah. I think that's the problem. Like, because I would say I'm that same exact way. And I would say that it has helped me get better at stand up. But it's, like you said, it's bad for your mental health. And, like, I'll regularly get off stage and just be like, not even that it sucked, but just like I wasn't happy with it. And have like Kevin Lamourie is one of the guys, Worcester comedian, or formerly Worcester comedian.
Formerly?
He's in Boston now. But,
Oh, is he?
Yeah, Cambridge, I want to say.
Oh, wow.
But he just, I'll always be like, that set was whatever, and he was like, shut the fuck up, like that was good. But that's my OCD talking, I think, and it's because it's like you could have knocked most of your set out of the park, but you tried your new joke and that didn't land the way you wanted it to, and then you're like, fuck that set,
Yeah.
And it helps you strive and makes you go home and like rewrite the joke. Whereas like I think somebody who doesn't have that goes home and was like, that went great. And then they'll do the joke the same way the next time. They don't do a level of self-flagellation and like self-examination they don't interrogate what was wrong with the joke.
Yeah.
So, but you just have to figure out, I mean, this is like this comes into play in my day job all the time because I manage project managers, and the people who are drawn to that work are perfectionistic, but everything always goes wrong. And so I have to talk people down off the ledge all the time because they're like, but I wanted it to go perfect and I did everything right and it's not going perfect. And it's like, yeah, the exact right person for this job is a perfectionist who doesn't care. Like you have to be a perfectionist who knows when to like turn that off because it's hurting you more than it's helping you. Leverage it when it's to your advantage and then shut it off if it's becoming detrimental.
Yeah, but I think that it's just such a funny parallel between like good comics and hacks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's the hacks who are like, I murdered, and then it's the good comic who had a great set, and it's like, that could have been way better. Like for example, like I did when I did Laugh, and hosting's always a tough job.
Yeah, sure.
I remember after my set, I was like, damn, I wish this was better. And I was like really down on myself. And then after, there was a group of people waiting for me to come out.
Oh shit.
All long hair, and they're like, dude,
Yeah.
You fucking crushed. That was awesome. You were my favorite one. And I'm like, oh shit.
That's sick.
So it's like, it's nice to get sometimes like that eye-opening this, but like still, man, like even after that, I think I did a set like after, and I was like, fuck, I wish this and this, but it keeps me writing, but in terms of writing, it's like, for me, writing is so hard. Taking the time out to do it, the constant hammer on the anvil for, working on a bit for 4 hours, you do it, it bombs, you bring it back, hammer it out. And I feel like in time, it's something that the time to make something from unpolished to polish kind of gets shorter. But that's like the longest thing forever. Like Chris Rock's like N-word bit, I think that was bombing for like, I think he said like 3 years or something.
Oh my God, yeah.
And then it turned into like his,
Well, I have had bits, and you may have had this too, where like I put them away because I've been working on them for months and they're not getting better. I think I've fixed it and then I didn't. And then I'll bring it back like a couple years later and make a small tweak, or maybe I just have a different confidence level now and I can pull it off. And I think that happens. And sometimes I think, like, my Cotton Eye Joe joke?
Yep.
That one, I basically brought back and started doing it verbatim, and it was crushing all of a sudden. And I was like, what the hell? I did this for like 3 months and it got, it was very tepid. And I do think it's like, you're more comfortable with the bit now. You've got some more confidence behind it. Maybe you've gotten your mouth around the words and the phrasing and the delivery a little bit better. Where like there are some intangible pieces, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think what might be tied to that is I've had issues with joke rot before, where you tell a joke, it does great, but the more you do it, the less laughs it gets.
Yeah, sure.
And then there's this quote by this guy Jerry Corley. He's called the Joke Doctor. He teaches stand up or whatever, but he said he was in an acting class because he thought acting would help him with his stand up, and he did his act to the class, and the teacher's like, you read your jokes, you didn't tell them.
Interesting.
And I've really taken that to heart of like, I'm not just trying to go up and wind myself up and just do my act. Like, it's like I'm trying to be in the moment more, and I think that's what happens to a lot of comics, where like they'll have a great bit and you're like, all right, I'm just gonna memorize it and just autopilot on every show.
That's probably my biggest vulnerability as a comic is I did this. I felt myself doing it the other night, and on a show, and I was like, why can't I pull myself out of this right now? I know I'm just saying my jokes, and it's the hardest thing for me. I try to, and nothing seems to help. Like sometimes I'll be like, I just need to make more eye contact with the audience. And then I'm like, well, how come that show where the lights are so bright I couldn't see anybody was like the best that I've had in like 6 months? Maybe I need to make less eye contact. You know what I mean? Like it's like it'll almost become superstitious at a point where you're like, and then you get in your head, you're like, okay, be in the moment. Am I being in the moment? Am I in the moment? What joke am I on again? Like,
yeah.
So it can be self-defeating.
But that's what's so interesting about stand-up, the layers of it. Not just the joke writing, but the performing aspect as well, and how much that can complement the material, and hurt it at the same time, where it could be a great joke, but it's just all about the delivery, where I think that has happened a couple times, even with me. Like, I had this joke, and it kept bombing, and then I think I don't know what mood was in, but I'm like, I'm just going to tell this way differently or something. And it was kind of, I told it much more looser, and it crushed. I'm like, oh my God,
Well, I think that's not that I've ever written from the stage, but like the closest I've ever come to that is when like I know the beats of a joke, but I don't know it word for word yet, and I go on stage and I tell it, and it murders, and it doesn't on the next one. And the reason is it felt conversational, like I was thinking about it as I was saying it, because I literally was.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a way to recreate that. And you have to sort of... I saw an interview with Louis C.K. where he was talking about his approach to like dark jokes. And because in this interview, somebody was saying to him like, you have such a great way of approaching these really sensitive, dark topics no matter how many times you've done the joke, where it's like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be talking about this. So you have like a sheepishness to you that is, that like wins over the audience and makes them feel like whatever. And he said, yeah, that's on purpose. That's like a trickery thing that I do, because I used to find out when I was first telling a joke like that, it would kill, because the audience felt like they were on this journey with me of like, we shouldn't be talking about this taboo thing, and we're talking about it, and that's great. But as soon as I knew the joke was bulletproof and I could just go up there and say it, I was like too cocky talking about school shootings or whatever it was, and it just came off as like deeply off-putting. So I had to learn how to maintain that sense of walking on eggshells or whatever as I'm talking about these topics, in order for the joke to stay consistent. And that really blew my mind, because that's something... my confidence level is one of those layers that I just really struggle with, where I'm like, okay, if I don't go in with enough confidence, I'm going to be too flat. If I go in too much, I'm going to be cocky and they're not going to like me. And I really do feel like that can be such a fine line, especially depending on the types of jokes you're telling. If you go in and you're talking about suicide and it's too confident, then like... they're like, fuck this guy, and you can't get him back,
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the biggest issues of being like your own worst critic, is you question everything you do. You know what I mean? I in terms of like Louis C.K., it makes sense because one of his idols was Carlin. Like, Carlin was his biggest. He even said that Carlin was the reason he started, scrapping material every year. Because he was like, I was doing the same shit hour, for 5 years, in like Watertown and Newton and stuff.
Sure.
And until he listened to an interview with Carlin, who was like, the interviewer was like, how do you have an hour every year? And he's like, well, I just scrap the material and start over. And I think Louis also carries that same motive of like, Carlin's idea of taking the audience, addressing the line, bringing them over it, saying it's okay to be here.
Yeah.
I think that's like one of the really big things he goes for in his act. I know also when he, in terms of like trying out new material, anytime he said this in an interview recently, when a joke bombs horribly, but it's like a really really dark subject, and people are like, "Ooh, he's like, that's gonna be a killer. That's gonna be that's gonna be
when I get there."
Yeah. But I find that just so interesting, and it's like, and I feel like personally, like I just hit the 3-year mark, and I feel like there's a lot of topics that still I just don't even want to tackle, because I feel like I want my joke writing to be on par with the subject. Because that's a big belief of mine where, like, I think Louis C.K. and a lot of these comics get away with it. Because, like you were saying, if a joke's bulletproof, you can also pair it with some very sensitive material. Where I think the writing has to be up there with how edgy, instead of kind of just saying, that's what makes a lot of shit hacky, I feel. When it's just dark humor and there's no real creative angle or anything interesting attached to it.
This is very loaded because this is just like all based on my own personal style.
Okay.
But not just with dark stuff. I just think writing personal is like the best way to avoid hackery and to avoid take on dark stuff that's like, I never come at it from like, I have multiple suicide jokes, but I never come at it from the perspective of I'm going to write a suicide joke today.
Yeah.
What I have I don't know if you know my bucket list joke, but it's like, it's about my friend who is crossing off too many bucket list items and it's making me nervous. And that's based on a real story. And I was like driving with my wife and I was like, he's in Iceland now. Like, you ever get nervous and it's like, so it's just like a real thought that I have, and it extrapolated into this whole bit. So it's very unique and it's very personal, and it's that friend's favorite joke, by the way.
Yeah.
So, and then my other suicide joke is my Golden Gate Bridge one, which is just like literally me and my wife riffing when we were at the Golden Gate Bridge about like, why do they have this sign that says you'll get fined if you're climbing on the railing? And it's like, oh, it's like, if I was going to jump, I'm definitely jumping now.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
And so again, it's like, I didn't set out to write a suicide joke. I just, if you write from your experience, you're going to occasionally write something that's in a very dark territory. But as long as it's really personalized, then that protects you from the intensity of the subject matter a little bit. Like, you still have to finesse it.
Yeah.
But it's better than if you're like, you ever notice how suicidal people can't just like get it together or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, it's totally different than that. You know?
Yeah. No, definitely. What do you think is like the biggest mistake a lot of comics starting out make? Because I feel like a lot of these, I'm practically an upcoming comic or like an open micer, honestly. But a lot of comics starting out like will really go to the dark stuff. A lot of them will jump at dark stuff or hacky stuff or dick stuff. But do you think there's like the number one thing besides that, or if it is that a lot of upcoming or comics starting out really missed the mark on?
Well, first of all, let me just say I'm only 5 years in, so I'm not the guy that's like, new comics you should really, but
I didn't realize you were 5 years in.
Yeah, maybe 5.5 now.
Wow. Shit. What year did you?
2018.
2018. Wow.
Yeah, I'm on the older side. I think that's why some people might think I've been doing it longer. But 2018 is when I started. In fact, I remember Brian O'Donnell told me one time that him and Sean didn't book me for a long time because they assumed I was like some hacky guy who had been doing this for 10 years. Because when I started, I was on the hackier side, but they were like, oh, he must have been doing this a long time because his joke structure is solid. And then I was like, I've been doing this is my 1 year anniversary, and they were like, what? They're like, all right, here's a
Yeah.
show, you know. And anyway, so but I think dirty is that was certainly a big one for me. I was too dirty when I
Same.
started, and it was okay. I still have most of those jokes in my act, and I'm proud of them because I felt like I was doing clever dirty material, and that was important to me. But you realize you can't just be the guy that's their whole act. And so I think that's the sooner you figure out how to write clean, the sooner you just have that extra tool in your toolbox, and you have another gear you can switch to if that's not working for an audience.
Yeah. I think it's absolutely essential to start writing clean.
Yeah.
Like when you start out, because it's like that's the stuff that, like, if anything does happen and there is an opportunity, you want to be able to write clean stuff.
Yeah.
Where if you're just writing dirty stuff, like, I feel like it's so easy to go down that rabbit hole of like just dirty topics and stuff, and then you kind of get that persona of being the dirty comic.
Yeah. And I would also say it is one of the downfalls of my method of like I'm purely writing from my life experience, because like sexual experiences and sexual shame are something that we all like experience, and so it is going to be one of your first instincts to be like, oh, that was weird the other night, and like want to write about that.
Yeah.
And it's relatable, so that it doesn't, and it's rewarded at open mics because that's dark stuff and dirty stuff and whatever is what open micers love to hear anyway.
Yep.
So I would say dirty is a big one. Another is not necessarily dark stuff, but thinking that offending people is a goal of comedy. That to me is a huge red flag. Like I remember being at an open mic years ago and overhearing a comic being like, dude, I did this show the other night. I walked everybody in the room. They were so pissed. And I was just like, why are you bragging about this? Like, you're bad at your job, dude. Like, this is not what we do. And it's not like, I'm not saying all comedy has to be squeaky clean and not like, touch on sensitive topics. I'm just saying like,
anyone could walk a room.
You want to make people laugh. Yeah. Like that's the core thing. Yeah. So I think it's being so dark at the expense of being funny.
Yeah.
And it's also not being able to work for certain audiences. Something somebody told me about Rhode Island is that, like at the Comedy Connection, for example, there's so many up and coming kids from Providence who love to talk about abortion and suicide and all this dark shit. But the people that come to those shows are like townies, like middle-aged townies who want to hear like my wife and my kid jokes and whatever. And they don't know how to pivot because they don't have any other life experience. They don't have other material that they can, whatever. So like a huge thing for me was I started working the door at this club in Foxborough, which was notorious for
Comedy scene.
the comedy scene, notorious for having like a tough audience, older, stuffy, conservative audience, and like I couldn't do my joke about my wife's vibrator, and I had to like figure out what's a clean joke that's going to work for them, and if it worked there, it would probably work everywhere. And so I think that's another huge part of it is like working lots of different types of rooms, because if you're a comic who's comfortable in Cambridge and you go to the suburbs and your material about intersectionality and whatever is not landing, like you have to figure out how to balance those things out. And likewise, like I have friends like in my peer group who I started with who are like, oh, I can't go to Cambridge. It's like, oh, they're too sensitive. It's like, really? Because like I can talk about pretty much anything I want to in Cambridge, and in fact they're down for my dark stuff more than like an old audience in Foxborough is. So I think it's all trial and error, and you get in your head about like, oh well, the old people aren't going to like me because of this, or the young woke kids aren't going to like me because of this, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as opposed to like you have to try it, and then you're working a muscle of how do I get better at these rooms that are not my natural ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely have a few points on everything you just said because I think for Rhode Island is famously filthy
Yeah,
for
yeah,
comics, and I think that's because of Alan Fitzgerald.
yeah, for sure.
I think he definitely the ripples of his presence still, are in that scene, and comics there worship him, and it's pretty obvious with some of the material they're coming up with, and I think also in the point of what you're saying about like material, I think it is best to have like material that travels. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
feel like comics will kind of stay in a kind of like a safe space in terms of performing. I remember we did a show and the headliner went up and was like, "This isn't Boston." It's like, well, I don't know. It's like that's what was so nice about like even though it was kind of a short period being in Austin, because it really expanded my horizons of like, oh shit, this is where the bar is for that. Even
Yeah.
though there was a lot of bro comics, there were killers who were in that scene. So to be around that and to be around so many creative people and then to come back to Boston, it's like, wow, the world is so much bigger
Oh
than
yeah.
that.
Chicago was like that for me because that was the first comedy scene. Like I'd been to New York, but I just found New York to be almost impenetrable in terms of like getting stage time when I've gone down there. Like I've gotten up a handful of times and never felt like I don't know. Chicago was just the first scene that I went to where I was like, this. There's multiple clubs. They're all they are the clubs have multiple rooms that are constantly running shows. It's just a much more robust and vibrant scene than what we have here. And because of that, like the talent level that you're exposed to is like so impressive. And you come back here and it is, not to shit talk Boston because I love the Boston comedy scene, but especially when you think of its heyday, is definitely fallen
The
from that.
'90s, yeah, it was insane, man. Like I had Danny Kelly on the podcast. He was telling me comics in a night would walk away with like 4 grand in their pocket,
Wow.
just from doing all these spots. What I know, and don't get me wrong, I love the Boston scene too. But what are your thoughts on it currently as a comedy scene?
Well, the positive thing that I'll say about it is there is a ton of stage time right now. You have a lot of like these upstart young kids who are starting their own rooms, and so you could do like 5 shows in a night if you time it right, and that's great for comics to be able to work out material. And if you look at some of the guys who have started those types of operations and take advantage of their own shows, like Josh Mandel and Rollin Atkinson,
Boston Comedy Club.
they have gotten so good at stand up because they're just doing it all the goddamn time, and they cultivate just really good audiences too, and so that helps them. And so if you to the extent that you can get plugged into some of those things and get those regular reps, because like you're saying there's nothing to replace that, get these regular reps, work your jokes over the course of a night. Like for me that's heaven, is like I want to swap out this reference and I can do it 5 times in a night and figure out what's the best one. Like
Yeah.
it's an OCD guy's dream. So
Yeah.
that's the good thing. I do think and I don't mean any disrespect to the club scene. I just don't think Nick's is what it used to be, and you can really like I've worked with Bill Burr, who's dropped in there a couple of times while I was there, and you can see it on his face that he's like, "What happened to this place?" Because it was used to be like an every night club, and it was, packed out, and so he'll come in on a Friday and it's 10 people, and the sign isn't working, and it's
Yeah.
like he's like, what the fuck happened to this
And the
place?
stage is, the width of like 3
I'm not trying to
feet.
put words in Bill Burr's mouth. This isn't something
Yeah.
he said to me. It's just like me looking at his face. And he'll like from the stage, he'll be like, the fucking light isn't even working, like, you know.
Yeah.
And so that is a huge bummer. And I think Laugh Boston is just tough to get stage time consistently at. I think that's a problem of like there's so many comics, so they can only rotate people through so often. But even with that, like that's a big room, and it's tough for most people to fill that room. I think
Yeah.
it would just be nice to have a version of Nick's that was higher quality.
Yeah, well, it's like also they've turned it into like a nightclub.
Yeah.
You know, like because there's a DJ booth on the stage.
Yeah.
Which is never easy, you know.
Yeah, especially if it's like if you're gonna do that, make it Def Jam comedy. And everybody's walking up to like some thumping track. But
yeah, like own it, you know.
But it's Eric Tynan being like, "All right, guys, we're gonna start the show." And what's up, Eric?
Yeah. But I think that is a big issue where there's a massive moat between the club scene and the comedy scene, you know. And I think, and of course, there's amazing productions, which I think some of these productions kind of outdo some of the clubs, honestly, with how many people they get in, with the seating arrangement, you know, especially.
If I was going to coach, or coaching is the wrong word, if I was going to make a suggestion to the people who run clubs in the Boston area, it would be find out what Rollin and Josh are doing for marketing and steal that person. Find out what the other Josh, I'm blanking on his last name, Duck Goofs. Ryan Howe.
Oh, yeah.
The other Josh, I don't know where I was coming up with that. Ryan Howe, Duck Goofs, figure out what he's doing for marketing and do that. Yeah. Like, I think that's a big part of the problem is marketing. Is that that's the major difference. I know comics that would rather do Duck Goofs or a Rollin and Mandel show on a weekend than Laugh Boston, because they're going to get a bigger crowd and and we're not necessarily a bigger crowd, but like a more packed crowd. And that's going to be better for clips. It's going to be better for working new material or whatever. So that's what I would say is they need to figure out a better way to market themselves to compete with those more DIY shows. But having said that, Off Cabot, run by those same people, is one of the best rooms in New England.
That's the one club I haven't been to yet.
It's fantastic. It's my favorite. I think the more I do stand up, the more just convinced I am that the horizontal room orientation is the only way to go. And that's how theirs is. And it feels like a traditional New York comedy club because of that. It's got like your tight little stage and everybody's like around you in a horizontal way.
Well, that was the same thing with the, I can't believe I'm forgetting the name already, the Comedy Attic.
Yeah.
Where there was no length to it whatsoever.
Totally. Absolute kill box.
And it was one of the best rooms, you know, where some of these shows, man, where it's like they got the people sitting diagonally this way, so you only see like two faces.
Yeah.
It's like, in what world is that, you know, good for comedy?
Deep and long, and you're just like, this is... Well, and that's the crazy thing. Have you've done the Hyde, right, in Providence?
No.
That room used to be deep and long, and I always had fun. I never had a great set there. I did the first time that they switched it to a horizontal orientation, and it is just like the best room I've ever done. Like it's just crazy how much it makes a difference.
It's same thing with Dot Tavern.
Oh,
they moved it so it's not you're looking
right.
down.
Yeah, I forgot about
the audience.
That. Yeah.
You know, why do you think that is? Do you think it's just because people are in the back and they feel like they're kind of removed from what's happening?
I think the biggest thing that you need in stand-up is like for the audience to break is a critical mass. You need a critical mass of people who are willing to laugh out loud. And the closer that they are to the comic, the more likely they are to break, even just from like the social pressure of like that guy's looking you in the eye and he's right here, and you'll probably feel like it's funnier because you're seeing his expressions better, and you're all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff. And so I think when you have it horizontally, you've got more people close to the stage, more people who are going to break faster, and then also just audit from an audio perspective, it's going to be better if the laughs and the microphone sound are bouncing off the back of the wall as opposed to having to like go all the way down a hallway.
Yeah, yeah, I agree because it's also like people in the back I've noticed like at shows will get up a lot, will kind of maybe talk to their friends
Sure.
for a little bit, and it's like I think it's also like that element of being completely removed from the show.
Yeah.
Where just like you're saying, where it's like you have the comedy attic where you're just packed in there. You're like it feels like everyone's on top of each other,
Yeah.
and the comics like just right there. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
totally. I mean, at the comedy scene, this used to happen because they would have tables at the back of the room, and people, as much as you'd encourage them not to, they would just hang out there, and they might as well have been watching the show on TV.
Yeah.
The amount of times that I heard anyone at any of those tables laugh out loud was maybe like zero.
Yeah.
Because you're just so far removed from what's going on. Because even then, it's like even if the whole front like seated section is laughing, you're still removed from that, and unless somebody at your table is laughing, it's not going to be contagious in the same way. So,
Yeah, for sure. Something I definitely want to talk about. One of my intros, besides the Milford Murderer, was the comedy cop.
yeah, sure.
How do you look back at that? Because I feel like you've kind of moved on completely. Because I remember you used to have a lot of prominent opinions online about a lot of the scene and open micers, and I feel like you've kind of just let all that go.
Yeah. A lot of it was mentors being like, hey, don't do that. People who've been in the scene for a long time who are like, hey, when I was at your level, I used to get upset about some of that stuff too, and I would post about it, and it's like people were like, it's sort of a tale as old as time. Like comics are always talking shit on the internet, but the more that you avoid that, you want to avoid looking like a dick, and so not posting your opinions online is a great way to do that. That I wasn't successful at in a lot of ways for a long time. I think, and another part of it is like, I'm trying to put this respectfully. You realize it doesn't matter. Like, the things that I was like, why do I care what an open micer is doing at some open mic or on some bar show, or like it doesn't actually affect me that much if there's some bar show with a lineup of 15 open micers. Do I think that's insane? Yeah. Do I think it's bad for comedy? Probably, but not in a way that's like warrants me going online and making anybody involved in that show feel bad about it. It's like, talk about it in your group chat like a normal person.
Yeah, and I think an issue also is like, and as much as I agree with what you're saying, it makes those comics kind of band together and be like, fuck those guys, we're the ones doing it right, and they kind of double down on what they're doing before. And I think like you might get a few people who might go to one of those shows and be like, well, just sticking with the Wilbur, for now.
Yeah.
But there's again, every kind of art form is going to have their shit shows. I've seen terrible concerts.
Of course.
Of like bar show concerts of like metal bands who are like, we're doing this show at the headliner, and they're all just terrible.
I think that, if I'm being totally honest, where some of that comes from is insecurity. And it's being like, why, if there's only so much stage time, why is a show like this being done? And so but the more that you're like, the way you fight that is you just get booked. Like you just keep your head down and try to be undeniable. and then you're going to get enough stage time, and none of that's going to matter, and you'll be glad you're doing whatever show you're doing instead of the show that has 15 open micers on it or whatever. And meanwhile, those people, those open micers, get to have a show and they get to try. And I mean that like because there is a difference between an open mic and a show, and like if that's like the only way they can get an audience in front of them, like more power to them. I think I was also having a little bit of, you know, this thing where like people like student loan forgiveness stuff where people be like, I already paid off my student loans. Why the fuck?
Yeah.
It was that because I felt like I had paid my dues and put in this like a year, 2 year grinding at open mics trying to become undeniable and whatever, and then see people being like, I'm 3 months in, I'm starting this show, 15 open micers are in my lineup, and I would be like, that's not how you do it. And if I had to do it like you had, like, and so there was like some of that too. It's just,
and especially if it's a comic who's just been going to just one open mic a week at the same open mic, you know, there's so many layers to it. For me, it's like, you know, there definitely was a jealousy aspect, and just like to like shit talk comics and be like kind of like bitter about shit. But it's like I'm thinking of this. Why am I not thinking of jokes instead?
1000%.
Why don't I put this energy into joke writing and reaching out to bookers,
or going to open mics and hanging out at shows,
and supporting other comics? You know, instead of, you know, we're all in this together. We should all be working as one, I feel.
Because I think that was like at the time, probably at a time where I was most anxious about like, why isn't my calendar as full as I want it to be? And you're right, like the much more productive thing to do when you feel that way is write your ass off, go to one more open mic than you want to go to, and just keep grinding until you are the way I always thought about it was like, make people embarrassed that they're not booking you. Like they'll see you and be like, how come he's not on shows? You know what I mean? And so, but that's because that's the only thing you have control over, is like how good you can become.
Yeah.
And so sitting there complaining about like what this bar show is doing or what that bar show is doing, man, this person's a hack, I don't like the material that they do. It's like, who fucking cares? Those aren't the people you're competing with. The people you're competing with are the people you go to a show and you're like, fuck, how did they come up with that joke? That's what you're, and you want to, so that's a better like way to compare yourself, and do it in a way of like, let people who are better than you make you better, instead of watching people who are not at the same level as you make you bitter.
Yeah, that's an amazing way to put it. But I think we're gonna wrap this thing up. This was awesome, man. Very, very insightful.
Thanks for having me on, man. And just would like real quick plug
of course.
for
have the floor. Completely.
The Christian nu metal band 1,000 Foot Crutch. Everybody listen to them. Their cover of Unbelievable is it's really good.
So. Yeah, well, Tim, thank you so much for doing this.
Of course, man.
Yeah. I'm Brandon Battick, and this is Disturbing the Priest.